the first thing to recognize is that since 2, right, since this historical condition is an antecedent condition for 3, since this historical condition is an antecedent for me having meaning in the world, and since this historical condition, the historical use, the fact that the historical community, linguistic community, has selected the word nu as sound to represent the idea naked, that's what I mean by 2, is subjected to a social construction, prima facie, then it is inherently subject to social construction. Now, the reason why I asked all of you as viewers how deep you wanted me to take this analysis was I would not incorporate that first point on page 5, analysis of meaning, in an intro discussion. But I think at this point you guys are getting comfortable with, if you've been following along from the first video, you should be getting comfortable with what semiotics is and the importance that it plays for meaning. So what I'll do is I'll give you this is an extremely technical bullet point. I'll make it a little bit more accessible. Okay, let's look at and you have to forgive me because this is going to be a bit derogatory. Let's look at the word fag. F-A-G. We know that in some cultures fag might mean cigarette. In other cultures, fag is a term that's used for a derogatory term to identify someone as a homosexual, right? So you say, oh, he's a fag, or you know, that guy's a faggot, right? It's a horrible word, right? It's up there with nigger and the rest of the bad words in the world, right? I don't want to use nigger because it's so loaded. But you can use nigger, you can use fag. You pick your bad word and stick your bad word up there, right? So now what we recognize is, well, there is a relationship between the word fag, the sound fag, the sound nigger, the sound that it makes, and any of those branches, right? Like so, and let's put nigger up on the board, you know, so we don't discriminate. Nigger's is a great bad word, right? All right, so you put the word nigger up, you put the word fag up, and remember what we said is the linguist analyzes the language, analyzes as the object. So we can look at the sound nigger and talk about how that sound literally triggers emotional responses in people, right? Okay, so that's one level. Obviously, we can look at the relationship between the sound nigger, the sound fag, and how that is related to an idea, right? The nigger is, you know, the nigger's lazy and he's dangerous and he's a savage, and the fag is hedonistic and compulsive and so on, right? These are the way that the terms have been used, right? But also there's an etymology, right? So that you could, you don't have to take it to this level, but you could say that the term nigger evolved etymologically from the word niggardly, which is a real word, which means basically nigger. It means, you know, to be lazy, I think, and so on, right? So it depends on how you analyze this. Now, in an analysis of meaning, what we have to recognize at this point, and it's very important, if you don't get this point, then you need to stop after I make the point and back up to video 1 and then rewatch all the videos back to this point. Because if you don't get this point, then you've missed something along the line, right? Because at this point, you really should be able to see the significance, because I really want to take it deep, because you guys really want it to go deep. If I see that the word nigger, the word fag, is used to describe people pejoratively, right? It was the case that in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual for that shrinks use, in the second version of it, that homosexuality was a pathology, right? If you were a homosexual, there was something wrong with you, like literally wrong with you. You were pathologically, there was something wrong. But what we recognize is that the terms and the ideas that we use, and this is via Foucault, and I'm not going to go too much into Foucault, but he was a genius. What Foucault primarily and others did, based on sort of this understanding of linguistics and semiotics, they recognized that, listen, the linguistic community is the one, and you should know this by now, that the linguistic community is the one that selects the word, the sound, and also associates that sound with an idea. So if it's the case that the linguistic community, right? If it's the case that a linguistic community is responsible for the creation and the use of language, I can't, my brain is on fried, L-A-N. If the linguistic community is responsible for the creation and subsistence of a language, and the linguist analyzes the language, then it's the case, right, that this is socially constructed, right? And we know this. Why is it socially constructed? First of all, what does social construction mean? It means that the things in existence which are privy to change can be they're socially malleable, right? So our language is socially malleable. An individual person can't change the relationship between the sound and the idea in a Lockean sense, but a community can. So then all you have to say is, listen, the word fag, if you're a homosexual, that term does not describe who I am. I am not that, right? That term does not describe who I am. A nigger does not describe who I am. I'm not a nigger, right? So, even though I'm Gen X and I grew up with, hardcore hip-hop, I love NWA, I listen to the most gangster rap ever, you would be hard-pressed to find an academic black educator that's going to identify himself as a nigger, because I know what that represents. I'm not a nigger, right? How do you transform and, in a sense, undermine the relationship between the term nigger and my identification as a black person, or the term fag and your identification as a homosexual man or woman? Well, what you need to do is you need to change the use within the linguistic community, right? So I'll go through and read this again. We must recognize, since the idea is a consequence of the historical system of relations, as an antecedent condition for meaning, that historically speaking, the term nigger has been used to mean lazy black bastard or whatever. The term fag has been used to mean dangerous, perverted homosexual. And since this is all a product, this use and this meaning relationship is all a product of society, because as we've seen, it's arbitrary, then you have to realize that this relationship is subject to change, right? It is subject to change. What we have to do as a community is demand among ourselves that we are no longer going to use the term nigger to mean what I am. We're no longer going to use the term fag to mean, to describe someone else, and we can change it. And what ends up happening, Foucault and many others, they railed against psychiatry. They railed against psychology, right? I mean, there isn't anything Foucault hates more than psychology, because he believes that psychology is a tool to condemn and a tool to reinforce bourgeoisie, politic ethics, body ethics, and so on, right? It's a tool, and I don't necessarily disagree or agree with this. Obviously, I like Lacan, so I mean, it is what it is. But I think his account is fair. The idea is that, yeah, who are you to tell me that I'm a fag? Who are you to tell me that I'm a nigger? The audacity, right? So what we do is we socially transform how that sound fag, because the sound fag will always remain, the sound nigger will always remain. That will never cease to be. But what can happen is we can transform the relationship between the sound and the idea. And what's happened in a contemporary setting with younger African American groups is that younger African Americans have adopted the term nigger to be like, hey, what's up, my nigger? And you say, oh my God, how could they be using it? But what you don't realize semiologically is that it's not the same, right? The sound nigger in the 1930s didn't relate to the same idea that the sound nigger relates to contemporarily, for some. But there's a huge debate, I'm not going to get into that. The point of this is for you to recognize that when we're talking about semiotics, when we're talking about semiology, it's not just some heady logicians, philosophers, semiologists, semioticians sitting around, just, cooking this up for fun. If you really understand this and you understand it well, what you can use is semiology, a study of symbols, a study of meaning. You can use this to transform the way that you're particular marginalized group is represented globally, right? So if you're a woman and you want the relationship of the concept and the sound woman to be different from what it is, identify it. If you're a black person and you don't want nigger to be how you're represented, challenge it. If you're a homosexual and you don't want fag to represent who you are, challenge it. And force the community to transform how we speak, transform how we think. It's at that point that everything changes, which is evident in the fact that currently homosexuality is not diagnosed as a pathological disorder, right? So was it the case that it was a disorder and it's not a disorder, but it used to be a disorder? What we recognize is, as social scientists, all of this is malleable, right? So it depends on how society is constructed. It's not the same as the gravitational constant, right? The beauty of being a social scientist is that I, as an individual, have the ability to transform my society, but the mechanisms in which I transform my society are going to be sort of contingent on a very, very, very solid understanding of semiology and I would say semiology and logic, but the logic part is a little bit harder for most, but at least a concrete understanding of semiology. If you have semiology and logic behind your back, you can basically transform anything you want, make the world as you see fit. So that is the effect, the sort of the significance of the analysis of meaning. When I say that what I'm interested in educating you all on is the importance of meaning in semiology, I really mean that, because if you get this, if you recognize that it is community-based prima facie, and that the community and the ideas formulated within the community are subject to change prima facie, because it's arbitrary prima facie, then if you're good enough, if you write well enough, if you're like Saussure, if you do videos like I'm doing, if you make your contribution, then the things that are improperly representing you and your marginalized population, whatever that might be, you recognize that, no, I can change this. I can change my life. I can change not only my life, but I can change the life of others and make it better. That ability is what it's all about for me. And that's why I said the only parts in Locke, Saussure, and Lacan that I'm going to concentrate on are the parts that allow you to do what I just explained. Okay.